Hi, my name is Rachel and I hate Crescent City. Adult urban fantasy is a genre full of, so far, a lot of misses from me, and one of the biggest is one of the most popular, which is Crescent City. I don't like it. I think it's really bad. It has the basic concept of urban fantasy that I like, where we're in a city with multiple supernatural, paranormal, semi-human factions, races, and a main character who is trying to solve a mystery, usually a murder. I really like that general setup. I want to find a adult urban fantasy book that has that setup and just knocks me out of the park. Is a total 5-star. I just think that this one is really not good. I read 2 more over the last year. One I just read, which is one of the longest running series that's very popular in urban fantasy, which is the Mercy Thompson series. I read the first book, which is called Moon Called by Patricia Briggs. It also was not a hit for me. I still have not found a 5-star adult urban fantasy. I have a few that I'll complain about you today. What to you today? Oh boy, the mouth is doing things. Let's go over what urban fantasy is. It is not like high fantasy. I'll discuss my examples of ones I did not like and why, and maybe y'all will be able to tell me alright, well, you say you like these pieces of urban fantasy, I have a rec for you. That is my hope. Throw me some recommendations. I would really like to stop having to rate all of these 2.5 stars and lower, mostly lower. There are 2 I have my eye on that I'm hopeful about that I'll talk about at the end. Okay, so the urban fantasy genre is, as I said, you normally see supernatural beings. The typical ones are vampires and werewolves. And we're talking about a genre that is typically set in a urban, a city environment, and it's normally either contemporary, either urban fantasy has been going on for a while, so it can be set in the 90s or anywhere up to a little bit in the future where we have a little bit of technology that we don't have today. But it's in a city setting. And these are books that are a mashup of the magical and the real world. So, people have cell phones and they're calling a werewolf on their cell phone. So yes, it's freaking Shadowhunters. And yes, I did read Shadowhunters. But today I'm not going to talk about YA. I want to talk about adults. I want to talk about ones that I've read that are for an adult audience, because there are some urban fantasy books that I have given 5 stars to. 2 of them, but both of them are urban fantasy. And I'd like to find some adult ones that I actually like. So the typical themes in urban fantasy, a lot of them are things that I like. Some of them I don't. So we do a lot of moral grayness in urban fantasy, a lot of moral ambiguity, oh boy, blurring the lines between good and evil, and the protagonist and the antagonist will challenge these notions of what's moral, what's not, and characters always end up in positions where they have to make shitty decisions. Typically murders involved, so normally we're investigating a paranormal murder. There's a lot of how much will you bend the law, and paranormal races werewolves and vampires and shit, the codes that they have, how much will you break those to get to get justice for a murder. To get murder. Oh boy, my mouth today. We talk a lot about identity, so werewolves and vampires are normally they're normally on the outs of society, or it's they're in charge and the humans are on the outs of society. So we talk about discrimination against werewolves or humans or vampires, and the struggle for identity and finding where you belong within a society that is made up of all these different paranormal races. And it's sort of analogous to real world. A lot of these are talking about queerness, being a real world person, being queer, you sort of end up on the outs of society, but instead in urban fantasy we use werewolves to have that conversation. Or in the case of Mercy Thompson, we have a gay werewolf. Not Mercy, one of the side characters. I kind of wish Mercy was gay. I don't know. I am only on book 1. Maybe it goes there. Who knows? A lot of these do romance, and particularly forbidden romance, because we're from different packs or clans or supernatural races, and the romantic subplot is a really common theme in these stories, especially also if you have a human and a supernatural character, a la Twilight. So the challenges of that. We talk about power structures, the consequences of power and hierarchy, power dynamics, and how supernatural creatures, certain ones will either have a hierarchy where they're above humans or humans are above them, and sometimes this means that they can't reveal that they exist to humans. So in the case of Mercy Thompson, we have the Fae have revealed themselves to the humans, but the werewolves have not. Another another thing we regularly see is, and this kind of bleeds into that last bit, is the conflict of coexistence. So we'll see like the tension between the human community and the supernatural community, or even like the tension between the different parts of the supernatural community. So the werewolves, the vampires, the fae and fairies, the sirens, whatever races the story has incorporated, the different conflicts between those things and how they coexist and how they don't coexist well. Where this genre can do well is really rich characters with really cool backstories, because they've come from a position where they, you know, are connected somehow to these supernatural races. Either they are them, or they grew up around them, or they have connections to them, or their parent is one, and complex motivations. So you might have a witch who is trying to solve a murder of her best friend who was murdered by a werewolf, but her romance with a werewolf complicates this because, you know, he doesn't want to invest, he doesn't think that another werewolf would do that, and just ample opportunity for characters to have a lot of stakes and a lot of issues, and we like issues. Great opportunity for character arcs. Even though these things are all very familiar, there are still so many different ways you can go about them. Another place the genre can do really well is creating like worlds that are, again, familiar but are different than ours. So it's like, wow, I could see this being the reality if I was living in a version of Tampa that had werewolves and vampires and shit. I recently read Kate Corain's book, and I felt like it didn't really mesh the Greek myth stuff with the sci-fi well. What's nice about urban fantasy is that because the author is so typically like well versed in what it means to exist in an urban setting, really all we have to do is like take what we love the most about the supernatural and integrate it. And most authors do this pretty seamlessly, where it creates like a really cool environment that you're like, oh shit, I could definitely see that being how it would play out. And it's very easy to visualize and enjoy like the escapism of it. The genre can do well by creating, again, like these allegories for marginalized groups like queer people, so that we can have these conversations about societal issues, but use things like, you know, werewolves to do them, like what it's like to be, like in Mercy Thompson, what it's like to be ousted by your community because you are a queer person, and what would need to happen within this community in order for equality to be achieved. And then there's always the opportunity to further genre blend in here. So we have the city and we have these fantastical elements, but if we add in a little bit of sci-fi, it makes it even further interesting. Sarah J. Maas's Crescent City books feels like an urban fantasy, but even though it's an urban fantasy, it still feels like set more high fantasy because it's not in a city that you and I really recognize. So there's a little bit more genre blending there, where I was surprised to open up Crescent City and find that it was more urban fantasy than high fantasy like ACOTAR, because it did more genre blending. So I appreciate that we can find like new styles, new avenues of ways to do like this very familiar idea. I just wish that Sarah J. Maas had done it better. Where the genre can not do well is it can be kind of racist, especially towards indigenous folks. So something we saw both in Mooncalled and Written in Red is the indigenous, like talks about like native indigenous North American folks is not appropriate. In Mooncalled, I don't think it's as bad as Twilight per se, but I don't think it's great in Mooncalled either, and it's definitely not good in Written in Red. So we have an indigenous main character who is native on her father's side. She is disconnected from her father. He died. She doesn't know him, so we're kind of like set apart from her culture in that way, in the same way that we are with like Alex Stern in Lee Bardugo's Ninth House, which just didn't feel like appropriate rep either. And the native side is where our main character Mercy in Mooncalled gets her shifter ability from. She shifts into a coyote, and in this book she's called a walker. I think I'm not even supposed to say that word. When people think to write these supernatural races, semi-human folks into urban fantasy, they start tying that to Native American lore, which I feel like is probably dehumanizing towards Native folks who already, you know, get like tied to, there's that like, oh, these like animal people. It's just not appropriate. I don't think that we need to write it like that. The other issue that we run into very often with urban fantasy is that it can be kind of sexist, or at least like play into weird misogyny, like normalizing misogyny in the hierarchy. In Crescent City, we have the notorious alpha hole phrase, but SJM is just like known for writing men who are like so territorial in a way that is just laughably over the top and eye roll worthy. Despite her doing it to make them seem sexy, I just find it such a cringe fest. Another book that runs into this issue is Written in Red, where we have a very infantilized main character. Meg is our main main character, and she is basically a baby in a grown woman's body, and she gets like threatened by her eventual love interest, Simon the werewolf, and I just don't understand why we treat women so poorly, especially in that book. Every other woman who is not like pure and perfect like Meg gets demonized and slut-shamed in a way that I just find not okay towards women. Another problem that this genre runs into is it is redundant. So we talked about it being familiar. You want it to be familiar, you don't want it to be redundant, which is difficult. There's a lot of repetition of tropes and characters and character dynamics and arcs, both in story and in character, and even like the setup that I like with the urban fantasy and the people coming together to solve a mystery, typically like a murder mystery. It is cookie cutter, and it's hard to find new ways to do that without repeating the same shit that 1,000 other books have done. This is an oversaturated market with a long history of books, so you really have to do something fresh, like, and bring to the table something that I have not seen before in order for me to rate it above 3 stars. For me, at least. I mean, there are other people who read this genre who have no problem with reading like the same story over and over again. We can also see like people having trouble with maintaining a balance with doing like, we're in the real world but we're doing the supernatural elements. You have to create a backstory for those and how it is different from our world, the history of that, and people find ways to do that are, again, racist against Native American folks, because you can't be set in the United States without talking about the history of the United States, which is built upon the genocide of the Native American people. But then you're also dealing with having to create a story that is not having fantasy elements overshadow like the setting of it, where we're still in the real world, which is like part of the fun. So it's a balancing act, and I feel like Mercy Thompson did a pretty good job of doing the balancing of like showcasing the different species but not really like doing anything fun with it. And then a major issue that these books fall into is pacing, because people don't know how to build their world, build a plot, and then pace it out in like a normal amount, and then we're just doing pages and pages of the same thing over and over. One such book that falls into that trap is, I mean, actually all 3 of the ones that I've complained about so far today. But let's do a review of Moon Called, because I was asked to do a review by my patron. Thank you for asking me to read this. All in all, I gave this like a 2, somewhere like a 2.5-ish. Moon Called is about Mercedes Thompson, who is a mechanic living in the Tri-Cities area of Washington, and she is a walker. She can turn to a coyote. She can turn at will, whereas the werewolves in this world cannot shift at will, or they're like less in control of their shifting. So she doesn't like shift on the moon or whatever. Shift because of shift due to the moon. Nobody's shifting on the moon. That's not happening. Nobody's shifting on the moon. She's not shifting due to the moon because she's a coyote, not a werewolf. She is very mom despite not being a mom. I really like Mercy as a main character. She is the voice of reason. Unlike the werewolves who seem to dominate the supernatural scene in this book, Mercy prefers to like live a very quiet, mundane life. She just likes to work as a mechanic, go home to her cat, and see her neighbor Adam, who she has a crush on, who's a werewolf and is like in charge of a pack and stuff, and also he's like a literal dad. I really like Adam, and I really like Mercy, and I like Adam's daughter, and I like Mercy's cat. But then this teenage kid shows up at her mechanic shop one day, and then he ends up dead, and she gets entwined in like basically like pack politics. There was like some turning of people into werewolves, but that sort of fell off because this book was mostly about pack politics, which I didn't really like. It would have been cooler if it was like a government agency turning people against their will, and like Mercy having to deal with that, and like the packs having to rise up. So Mercy, as I said, is a great protagonist. I just really like being around her. She's got the typical stuff you see in an urban fantasy main character, like independence. She's tenacious, she's humorous, she can be like one of the guys. She is a walker in a world dominated by werewolves and other supernatural beings, which mostly we just see the werewolves, then we see a little bit of the vampires. She's set apart in this being this walker, this coyote shifter, in a really unique way. For some reason this book, you know what, it really reminded me of Gilmore Girls in a way, which is very odd. Mercy is very much like the mechanic lady from Gilmore Girls mixed with literally Lorelai Gilmore, and her love interest Adam, this pack leader, is very Luke. He's very Luke, like very Luke Danes. Mercy is resourceful, and she's smart, and she's kind, and she's very mom, but she also takes no shit, but she's also a friend to everybody. I just really like her. I just wish that the plot that she inhabited was better. She doesn't really go on a character arc. She is the same person from the beginning beginning to the end, and here that works. The plot does not though. And I also wish that she was not written in a way that feels a little bit appropriative of Native American culture, or at least like maybe an appropriate Native American rep. I think that Patricia Briggs wrote like a really interesting world here. Again, you really have to do something different with urban fantasy. I like her take on this like typical urban fantasy with werewolves and vampires and fae existing alongside humans. We get this really interesting dynamic where like vampires and shifters and werewolves, they're not like out to society, but the fae are. And the way that the fae revealed themselves was through a court case, which was really interesting. They sort of like soft launched themselves through a court case by like proving that this person could not have committed a murder because they were fae, and they couldn't have held the murder weapon because it would burn them because they're fae. That was very creative, and I was very into this, and I almost wish that that had been the plot of the book. I do like the romantic chemistry between Adam and Mercy. They're very, again, Luke and Lorelai to me. I really like it. It's cute. It feels familiar. I like both of their characters, and I also really appreciated that it didn't overshadow the plot, but I actually wanted a little bit more out of it. Like all that happens is like they clearly have had feelings for a while and they go on a date in the end. Again, it's very Luke and Lorelai to me. I also really like that Mercy is cool with Adam's teenage daughter, Mooncalled. It like explores like the identity and acceptance. It talks a lot about like lone wolves, accepting that you're a werewolf, being accepted into a pack, all through the lens of like Mercy viewing this and not being accepted anywhere because she is not, coyotes don't travel in packs, or they don't live in like a pack system. So she's struggling to find her place in the world, but then, you know, one of her friends is a werewolf who is gay, and he's also trying to find his place in the world. I do like that we had this queer man who's a werewolf who is accepted by Adam, but he's still having trouble being accepted by others because he's queer. This came out in 2006, so like having a gay man werewolf portrayed positively was probably like a big deal at the time. I don't know if this is the best. I'm not a gay man, so I don't know, but I don't know if this is the best rep. You can let me know. But I'm glad he was there, and I'm very glad that his character did not feel tokenized, and it felt like his character actually mattered to the story, and he had a boyfriend who needed to know about the werewolf component, but like our queer werewolf is like, well, I can't tell him. I'm not supposed to tell anybody, and Mercy's like, I'm gonna tell him. Mercy's like, I'm the mom of the group despite not being a mom. I've got this. The predictability is where this book starts to, I mean, other than like the Native American rep being probably inappropriate, the issues this book has is like the predictability of it. So a lot of werewolf shifter urban fantasy books are about like the hierarchy of the werewolves, and this is that, and that feels like that's all the plot is. Like basically that is the mystery, that is the plot. Who's doing this? It's werewolves against other werewolves, even though Mercy is not a werewolf. Her love interest to be is, he gets hurt, his daughter gets kidnapped, and it's werewolves, and it's all about hierarchy. I mean, there was a witch involved, but damn, like she came out of nowhere, and then there was a guy who was a witch, I think. I don't know. It got real convoluted at the end because like we had all these different men thrown at us, and then randomly this one woman who had been in the background is like, oh, she's a witch and she's actually bad and important, and it's like, wait, when did any of this occur? That's the other issue, is the plot. It's not just that the book is predictable, it's that the plot is predictable and boring because of that. It was all about like trying to replace a guy who's in charge of werewolves. And I kept thinking to myself while reading, I'm having all these different like dudes thrown at me and like contextualizing them by how they are, like what their relationship is to Mercy and to the packs. Who am I supposed to care about? Because I don't remember any of them. I love Mercy, I like Adam, I like some of Adam's pack, but all that like happens here is they're trying to figure out who done it, they figure out who done it, Mercy and Adam go on a date in the end. And the series is long. It is 14 books, and if we can't pace out a plot that hits in book 1, I can't imagine what we are doing over the course of 14 books. Without me falling asleep, I don't think so. Speaking of pacing, that is issue number 4. What's being paced here in this book is not a typical 3-act structure. So even though this doesn't take long to read in my experience, you can fly through it. It just feels like we very quickly get through something that doesn't do much of anything. So while we have like a unique world, a great main character, I like the love interest. It might be an enjoyable read for like big fans of the genre, but I don't think that this first book is doing enough special for me to be like, if you're gonna read urban fantasy, you gotta read Mooncalled. I like am afraid that if I say like try Mooncalled for urban fantasy, people are gonna be like, this genre is not for me. Especially because again, I don't think that the native rep is appropriate. So while I wish this was a better review, I'm gonna settle on giving this like a 2. I really do love Mercy. I bet you that the series like continues to have like great moments with Mercy and probably Adam, but man, I don't see myself reading 14 books of this. Crescent City, I have hardly anything nice to say about Crescent City. This series of Sarah J. Maas's is one that pisses me off the most, honestly. This pisses me off more than A Court of Thorns and Roses, which is like, I tried rereading some of that today and I was like, oh my god, the amount of retconning that's going on in between this and book 2 is egregious. And then Throne of Glass, I think, is like a middle of the road YA fantasy. The only thing I like about Crescent City is the setting. We have a lot of issues here. We have a length issue. It's 800 pages long. 800 pages long series intro. It has, just the prologue alone is ridiculously long. And then we have a murder mystery, which is so dragged out, yet blatantly obvious in the whodunit. I was like, I know it's that person. And when it was revealed, I was like, yeah, duh. It's so long for no valid reason, and I really hate that this book, you can tell that this is the point where Bloomsbury said to Sarah J. Maas, write what you want, you don't have to edit shit anymore. That's what I feel like. I resent that. We have a major info dumping problem here. Like, this is probably one of the best examples of info dumping that I can think of. But again, that's because I don't think that this was edited. It's not that Sarah J. Maas can't write, it's that she writes a very particular way that, sure, it's compulsively readable for the people who already love her stuff, but I think it's unedited, and I think that she just relies on doing the same tactics over and over because it's not like Bloomsbury's going to tell her no. So we have a huge amount of info dumping here about this world that we're in a city, but we're not in a city like the Tri-Cities area of Washington like we are with Mercy Thompson. We're in a completely different universe. We're in a city in a fantasy world that is connected through like parallel universes to her other high fantasy series. We have to learn a lot about this world, its history. There's nothing that we really know much about to fall back on. The author has to fill in a lot of gaps, and how she does this is by dumping info in your lap that you eventually forget, because again, it's 800 pages long, and like, I think so is the sequel. It's a slog, it's not enjoyable, and it should be, because we do have supernatural races that we don't normally see. Like, it's not just like vampires and werewolves. It's got like underwater people and shit, and like little sprites. It's got like the same amount of variety that like City of Bones has, but again, City of Bones is not great either. And we have like the Viper Queen, but like, I don't care about any of these races that Sarah has created. I know they're there, I should be interested, but what I do know, I don't care about. What I do like is the setting. I think she knows how to describe a city. I think that it's cool that she set up a city in a fantasy world. I feel like she knows how to set a stage. I just don't think she knows what to do when she gets the players on it. Like, I can still picture the places that we went with Hunt and Bryce. I really like the idea of like Bryce working at a museum. I can still picture like Bryce hanging out in her apartment eating pizza with Hunt while they're trying to solve this murder mystery. But I don't like anything of what we like did in these locations. I just remember them, and I'm like, well, that's great that she set that good scene up. Sucks that I can't fucking stand any of her main characters. Speaking of her main characters, Bryce Quinlan, the protagonist of this series, is like, I'm hot and relatable and everybody wants to fuck Bryce. And I'm like, look at me. I don't care that everybody wants to fuck Bryce. I do not care. One of her guy friends is like so obsessed with her underwear, and I'm like, okay, so you're obsessed with her underwear because Bryce so hot and you're friends, and what is the point of this? This is really stupid. The plot of this is that there's like a war going on between humans and everybody else. And it's because the humans are lowly, but Bryce is half human. So Bryce is the way to get the audience to care about the humans who we barely see. And she's so nice because she sympathizes with the humans because her mom and stepdad are humans. But this doesn't actually seem important. It just feels like it's just there's a shortcut to make Bryce look better than the other, basically Faye. We're supposed to care because Bryce is half human and cares. But what if I don't care about Bryce? What then? What then do you have about the humans that I'm supposed to care about? In this book, thematically, we're doing the same recycled nonsense that Sarah tries to do with her other books. Grief over losing a friend, so it's very like Nehemia and Aelin, except in this, it just feels very much like Aelin is the one who died, because our friend of Bryce's who died was always the one making plans and keeping secrets. Wait, no, that's also Nehemia. See, we're just recycling the same thing we did in another Sarah J. Maas book. It's like the typical, you know, power structures and imbalances amongst supernatural races in a city setting, but it's not doing anything that I particularly feel fond of. Again, you really have to set yourself apart if you're going to do urban fantasy. It does some exploration of trauma, but again, I get really annoyed with how Sarah J. Maas decides to have conversations about trauma, particularly like trauma responses of traumatized women. I don't like the way that she did Nesta and Farah in that respect, and I don't like the way that she does Bryce in that respect. Very much feels like we're just recycling the same ideas around trauma that Sarah J. Maas has. And I'm like, well, I didn't like them the first or second or third time you did them, and I don't like it now. I just don't think I don't think she does that theme very well. The predictability of it, not just being an urban fantasy book, but a Sarah J. Maas book, means that all of that like weird gender shit you see in this genre typically, crank that shit up by 1,000. The term alpha hole, referencing men being paternalistic, is the worst. It's the worst. The use of male and female here is just as bad as Agatar. I just fucking hate that shit. Readers who enjoy an urban fantasy setting but want to like experience a little bit more of a high fantasy setting, and if you like heavy romantic subplot, and if you like girl boss feminism, you might like this. And it's got a lot of like the supernatural elements. So like I think that probably a lot of like very urban fantasy centric girlies are not reaching for this because they think that it's high fantasy when it's urban fantasy. So you might want to try it if you are an urban fantasy girly and you have not yet reached for it. You might want to try it, but I don't think that it's anything special personally, and I don't think it would sell a fraction as well if it did not have Sarah J. Maas's name attached to it. I really don't think it's written well. The other one I want to talk about is one that honestly I hate even more. I don't like the setting. I don't like anything. I don't like anything about this. Like, at least I like settings inside of Sarah J. Maas's book, which is like below bare minimum. But written and read by Anne Bishop, no, I don't like anything about it. This one has werewolves and vampires. It's in a world like ours, and human society and non-human society are separate, and I still don't really have a good understanding of either of them in this world, and I do have a full review on this. I feel like the use of self-harm in this book is really inappropriate. The infantilization of the main character made me feel incredibly uncomfortable, and this, like Mooncalled, again has some stuff about Native Americans that I don't think is appropriate, like depicting Native people as like monsters who ate people. Yeah, I don't really understand why urban fantasy does that to Native folks, like in the creating of like the history lore. Why? This reading experience though was even like worse than Crescent City, despite it not even being as long as Crescent City. It's long though, don't get me wrong. It was miserable. Like, I know Crescent City was at least trying to be funny. Was I laughing? No. But at least an attempt was made. Nothing like Written in Red to make me nicer to Sarah J. Maas books. I can't stand the setting of Written in Red because I don't understand it. We're in a courtyard, but not like a courtyard. We're in a thing where all these different races do business and shit, but also part of that business is literally creating human meat. I'm very confused. I don't know why it's called a courtyard or what's actually meant by that. I don't know what it's supposed to look like. All these different fantasy races like werewolves and vampires and shit, they like do business there, they live there, and humans like live on the outs of this. They're not really involved. And our main character, Meg, is technically a human, and she's in hiding from bad men who would use her for her power because she's a Cassandra Sengway, is that how you say it? Where if she cuts herself, she can tell a prophecy, which I don't think is appropriate. And whatever the opposite of Mercy Thompson is, that is our main character, Meg. She is basically an infant in an adult's body, and the love interest, werewolf guy in charge, Simon, literally threatens to eat her, which I don't think is sexy. He doesn't mean eat her in like a sexy time way. He means literally. He is everything I hate about alpha shifter man main character in urban fantasy. Like the ultimate unenjoyable, can't wait for it to be done so I can be away from this man, misogynist yuck. And this honestly felt written by somebody who struggles with internalized misogyny. Like, the only good woman is Meg. We have another character named Asia who is like so aggressively villainized by the book, including but not limited to making her stupid for no reason, and then slut shaming her, and then like shaming her for being ambitious. It felt like the author wrote her as a vendetta against a real life woman. Asia is so bad and Meg is so good, and because of course like the only good woman in this is the pure and infantilized main character, Meg. Every other woman felt like the author hated them and wanted you to hate them too. The only character I like in this was like this old vampire guy who just wanted to have like VHS tapes delivered to him. That would make a great short story. Unfortunately, it was a whole book that I hated. So you can see that I'm having trouble finding an adult urban fantasy book that I like. There are 2 YA ones that I have liked. I did like City of Bones in high school. We all know this. And Carlos is staring at me and now I can't do my job. Leave!
You're just doing a great job. I just want to watch.
Don't shame me for who I used to be, liking City of Bone.
Okay, don't shame me for other things.
So the YA urban fantasy books that I have been, and these are like recent in the last couple of years, because I did used to like City of Bones when I was in high school and stuff, and now like you can, no thank you. Blood Like Magic by Lucille Samberry. If you liked Encanto, by the way, you will like this. It's got like it's got that thing going on with the whole family situation, but this is set in the city of Toronto, just a little bit in the future, so we have a little bit of sci-fi elements like technology wise. And our main character is Voya, who comes from a family of witches, and after years of waiting for her calling, which is like a trial that each witch has to pass in order to get their powers, Voya fails, and so Voya's ancestor gives her a task to complete in order to get her calling and get her magic, and the task is you have to kill your first love. And then if she doesn't kill her first love, like her family's not going to have strong magic. So there's witches, there's a little bit of a family mystery going on, and there's a little bit of like sci-fi technological advancement here that's involved. It's such a great mashup, doing really interesting and fun things in the genre. I found it incredibly immersive. I was really captivated by this. I loved Voya as a main character. I loved like all the different struggles that she was having, both like with this budding relationship that she's gonna have to kill this kid, and also like within her family and like finding out these family mysteries. Again, it's very Encanto. I really liked it, and I think that it's a very good urban fantasy. I just wish that there was something that had these things but for an adult audience. The other one, which actually these two are narrated by the same audiobook narrator, who is Janice Abbott Pratt, and she does such a fantastic job bringing both stories to life. So the next one is Legendborn by Tracy Dion. So our main character is Bree Matthews, and her mother dies in an accident. She is really struggling with grief. She goes to this program for high schoolers at UNC Chapel Hill, and so she's living out of college, so it's like college, like micro city kind of thing. And then she, on her first night on campus, witnesses a magical attack. So she gets introduced to this society of the Legendborn that hunt these creatures down that attacked. And a mage tries to wipe her memory, but instead unlocks a memory of her seeing another Merlin mage, where she saw another one of them at the hospital the night her mother died. So she thinks that there's a connection and that there is like a mystery beyond, you know, what the police report said about her mother's death. She thinks that there's something else to it. And so now she's trying to infiltrate the Legendborn society of these like Merlins to figure out what the connection is between the Merlins and her mother's death. But it's a little more complicated than that. She's a chunky one too. And this also has a little bit of a love triangle that I actually think works well, which is rare. This is very immersive. It has different kinds of magic, different like old magical societies with their different histories. I like that it's Arthurian legend, but in Arthurian like fantasy legend, but set in an urban fantasy setting. It's very emotionally charged, but it's very adventurous. There's a reason why it's so well loved by so much of the book community. If you like this series, you should check out one of my friends, Deanna, makes a lot of content about Legendborn that is really funny. She's a huge fan. She told me not to read the sequel until the next book comes out, because otherwise I'm just going to be heartbroken and frustrated. So I'm just going to wait to read the sequel until the next one. I do want to read an urban fantasy though that is adult, that I will rate above 2.5 stars. That would be so great if that could happen. Could we make that happen?
Hi, it's me, and I am very empty up here because I realized because I posted this video for my patrons, and they were like, hey, what about these 2 books? One of which is here. And I was like, not only have I read them, I liked them. So I'm an idiot, because there are urban fantasy books that are adult that I do like. There's 2 of them. One of them is Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I do not own a copy of this. I own a ton of copies of Sylvia Moreno Garcia books. I actually have signed copies. I went and I met her. I listened to her speak not that long ago. It was fabulous. She's brilliant. She's a fabulous writer, and this is her noir vampire book that I gave 3.5 stars to, that I did like. It's a very odd thing to describe, but because it's so basic, really like the joy of reading it is to experience Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing. As always, like, her writing is always impeccable, even if I don't love the story, and that was true for this. So this is about like warring vampire clans. There's like, it's set in Mexico City. Our main character is Atul, and she runs into this dude Domingo, who is just living his life like picking up trash on the street, and she is a vampire, and yes, she does have a dog. So animal companions, another reason I liked it. However, the story is very basic. It's just like, Atul needs to get away from warring vampire clans and drug lords. This sort of felt like, have you ever spent a weekend at your grandma's house and you watch a movie at like 3 a.m, and the next morning you're like, is that a real thing I watched, or did I dream that? That's this. I don't really know how to describe it other than that. It's an experience. It's a wonderfully written experience, but it's not anything that I would say like, this plot, you must experience it, and these characters, you must experience them. It's just a noir vampire urban fantasy book set in Mexico City with different kinds of vampires, warring vampire clans, and Atul the vampire and Domingo the human, and the adventures they have along the way getting Atul away from certain people. And it's good. It's very well written. It didn't really stay with me other than the writing. Like, the characters have not stayed with me. There's really nothing for me to like say other than it's a very well written book, and Silvia Moreno Garcia really knows how to make you experience something. But the characters in this, like, I love the characters in Silvia Moreno Garcia's other book, The Beautiful Ones, and this did not make me feel that way. 3.5 stars. I really liked that one. But then one I have given 5 stars to is This City We Became. See, when I was thinking about this video, I was like, all right, what urban fantasy books like have I read? And my mind immediately went to like vampires and werewolves and stuff, and I completely forgot about this one, which is an urban fantasy that does not feature any sort of like supernatural races living amongst humans. This is a very very unique book, but it is urban fantasy, and it is one that I gave 5 stars to. This is the first in a duology, and I believe I've talked about this before. This is a book about how every major cities have souls, and New York City, which is featured in this book, has a soul, but the 5 boroughs, 5 different factions of New York are the different parts of the soul, and each of these different factions are represented by different people. And there's also a ancient evil that is threatening to destroy the city and the 5 factions of the soul. So they have to like band together and stop this ancient evil from destroying New York City. And it's so good. I just forgot that it was urban fantasy. It is a 5-star urban fantasy book. It is not one that has like vampires and stuff, but it does have like the idea of underlying paranormal is a weird word for it, but paranormal things living underneath a city. This is a 5-star read for me. So all that to say, I have actually liked some adult urban fantasy books. I just forgot. Okay, thank you.
I do have 2 possibilities that I hope to get to in this new year of 2024. The first is Foul is Fair by Elise Hay. The author was nice enough to send me a copy of this book. This is around 250 pages, which I think is a good length for an adult urban fantasy book. I don't think that they need to be super 9-hour long audiobooks, 380 page books. I think 250 is a good sweet spot for an adult urban fantasy book, personally. Our main character is a witch, and she has taken up a new job as a social worker. But as with many urban fantasies, this is a murder mystery. So the last person to have her job was murdered by a lycanthrope, and she and the prime suspect have to team up, who is very hot by the way, have to team up to like figure out who did it. The cops are out of their depth. Of course they are. And there's also witches and wizards and lycanthropes and fairies. And the author says that she wanted this to be more of like a feminist urban fantasy, which appeals to me because, again, often what I don't like about the genre is like the blatant raging sexism. Shout out Written in Red again. So I'm looking to see if this one more hits the mark for me. And another I'm hoping to like, and I have high hopes because I have read from this author before, is Rosemary and Rue by Shauna McGuire. And this is the October Day series. And Shauna McGuire is also Mira Grant, who wrote Into the Drowning Deep, which is like one of my favorite horror books. Shauna McGuire is a really good writer, so I have high hopes. I don't want to be disappointed again. So this is about October Day, who is a changeling, who is half human, half fae. All the best urban fantasies have half human, half something person. Well, not all the best. A lot of urban fantasy has a half human, half supernatural main character. She sort of like denounces both sides of her heritage and just returns to like a normal life, our main character, October Day. But then the fairy world is like, not if we have anything to say about it. And of course, there's a murder. So Countess Evening Winter Rose is murdered, and this pulls back our main character, October, back into the Fae world, and she has to find the Countess's killer. This is a murder mystery. It's Shawnee McGuire, so I do have high hopes, but like I'm really hoping that this will be the one that I rate over 2.5 stars. It would be really nice if I could make this the one that is not 3 stars and below, which has been my experience with adult urban fantasy thus far. Even though I like the idea of it, I just want to find one that really hits. So let me know if you have read Moon Called, Written in Red, Crescent City, any and all of these. I will link Elise Hayes' book, Fowler's Fair, down below. Thanks again to Elise for sending me the copy. I'm very excited to hopefully in this new year find an adult urban fantasy that I actually freaking like. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Leave your comments and questions down below, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye.
Hello. Before I go, I have to say thank you for being a friend to my Therapy Bills patrons. Oh, actually, I have to show you something. Somebody made me something. Vienna made me a Golden Girls bag because thank you for being a friend, and the inside is gay. So I thank you. Shout out Vienna. I'm very excited about this. Okay, thank you for being a friend to my Therapy Bills patrons, and those are Alexander, Brittany Bobitney, Cami, Chris, Christine and Bean, DJ Rocktopus, Ellie, Emperor's New Blues, Aaron with 2 E's, Eric, JC, Jack and Jill, John E, Julie D, Casey McKenzie, Kate W, Caitlin M, Quinn, Lady Kittybug, Lex, Night Owl Reader, Alice, Rain, Reese, SJ, Samar, Scarlet, Shiny, SMK, the epic feminist side-eye of Carlos. Hi, Peggy. Hello. Thank you all so much for being a friend. I appreciate you. Happy New Year. Thank you for being here. Okay, goodbye. And last but not least, I have to say thank you for being a friend to my Potato Starch Marxist patrons, and those are Alicia, Amanda, Andy, Angelica, Anita, Artie the Ninth, Ashley H, Ava, Ballads and Bookends, Beck, Blythe, Bookish Bats, Bookish Brain Rot, Bree, Caitlin, Cardinal Ginger, Carlin, Casper, Catherine, Kathy, Chris, CJ, Cole, Colleen, Corwin, Corey, Darren, Deborah, Dex, Diet Goth, Dorothea, Ebby, Emerald Dodge, Emily A, Emily L, Emma, Aaron, Ezra Moon, Fiona, Hannah C, Hannah T, Harpy Curo, Haley G, India Inks, JM Tennant, Jay is on Olympus, JT, Jen Michelle, Gender Queer, Jenny G, Jillian, Jojo Bookish, Jess Pugsley, Kat, Catherine, Katie, Katya, Kayala, Kendra, Kiara, Kylie, Laughing Cat Dog, Lazarus Ray, Library of Scars, Lisa B, LP, Lou Siri, Lustful Octopus, Martin, MV Marlowe, Madison, Marcella, Marquita, Malara, MK Books, Molly, James, Nat, Natalie, Never, Nicole G, Nicole R, Nyan Binary, Paige P, Penny Chilling, Foxglove, Pixel Stars, Rachel B, Reba, Rebecca, Rivi, Rosie Thorne, Rowan, Secoria, Sadie, Samantha M, Sarah C, Sarah H, Sarah the Bear, Sarah Z, Shamed, Shannon, Sheen Onion, Sean, Talia, 3 Old Dogs, Tina, Toast, Trash Can Teddy, Tito Phoenix, and Writer A. Thank you all so much for being a friend.